Hello, friends, and welcome back. We are back again for the Oscars project. We are to 1963, and today we will be discussing the film Tom Jones. Yes, this should be interesting. So here with Jared and Chris. Jared, how are you doing today?
I'm okay. I'm all right. Oh, okay. I gotta get my head around this. But welcome, Squires, to the film Tom Jones. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. I mean, we got a good run. We got what, four films into the Oscar run, and this is the end of the series, unfortunately. Uh,
Yeah.
oh God, yes, it was Chris Moore and all of that kind of stuff. This is Tom Jones, and I, I had seen this film before, although not for many years. But it is well known for being a head scratcher of an Oscar win beforehand. So when I knew it was coming up, I was like, this will be really something, especially following something like Lawrence of Arabia or otherwise, things that are, the very opposite of the, well, opposite's the wrong word actually, because there are aspects of it that are similar, but Tom Jones is an interesting choice.
Yeah, I think I'm hoping to rely a little bit on your British citizenry to kind of explain some of this to us, because it is decidedly British.
Yeah,
Yes, it's very British.
Yeah.
it's
Very
also,
British.
I think it's worth pointing out, it's a fucking sex comedy. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's very much a '60s British sex comedy in many ways, and it has some very distinct filmic choices which lended itself to getting reevaluated throughout the year. But I think this is, I mean, what I will say is this wasn't exactly a banner year for film in Hollywood in general. Like, if you see the other things that are up against it, it wasn't exactly a year where there was a very clear cut winner or a couple of headlines that's been the past couple of years. There were other films around at this time in world cinema. Like Leopard came out this year by Luchino Visconti, which had Alan Delon, Claudia Carbonell, and Burt Lancaster, and it's for me one of the greatest films of all time. And it, because it was made by an Italian person outside of Hollywood, it would never have been dominated. Yet the
Mm.
British seemed to straddle that line an awful lot easier, even though this was a British-made film made by the Woodfall Studios in Britain. It managed to skirt over that an awful lot easier.
Yeah. Uh, so this was a head scratcher for me. I'm not a fan of the kind of the Monty Python type of comedy.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I expected, but it was a lot different than that.
Hmm.
It is very decidedly British. The so the humor and the humor, there's a contrast between the humor and then there's some brutal scenes of
Mm-hmm.
like the hunt and
Mm.
the just the way that they treat each other. So I guess that's kind of the standout for me, is at least positive. I guess you do see both sides of it, like how they treat each other and the way that they behave because they're in this position. But also, it's yeah, and the cinematography had me scratching my head a little bit because it seemed like it was filmed shaky on purpose. I know it seems like it's on purpose, but I'm not sure why.
Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering about that myself because you're opening up right away with this super long, annoying, boring shot of a baby's face right there, and
Yeah,
you're just like, okay, I get it. It's a big baby head. I get it, and it just never went away, and I'm just like, wow, this is what I'm in for already. Like right off the bat, I'm like, and I get it. So Tom Jones seemingly is
Mm-hmm.
kind of abandoned as a baby, and that starts off his journey through life here, and and then of course you get that he winks at the camera, breaking the fourth wall a little bit, and so there's you get those little inserts of humor here and there. But then I did notice throughout the rest of the film there were a lot of very close-up shots on Tom Jones's face that kind of mirrored that, shot at the baby at the beginning. So I get kind of what they were doing there with with that theme running through the film of the constant look at Tom, look at his face, look at his, he's like the focus of his world, and um uh and so, but I found it annoying a lot to see that all the time. Um, and then, of course, you get all the women fawning over him. What a handsome chap, and all this stuff. And, and I'm just like, I was just like, wow. uh, yeah, and we we get more into it as we go on.
So, well, where to start with this? I actually quite like John Jones as a film. It's never a awards winning movie. Like, it's very much of its time, and it's actually a film about class, very clearly. It's again an extremely British thing to do, but the ridiculousness and the hypocrisy of the class system in England. But actually, if you take it right back to 1960, right, The Apartment won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1960.
Sure.
But the most influential film that came out that year worldwide was a film called Breathless by Jean-Luc Godard, right? Which was a part of the French New Wave kind of thing. It was very much, but it was all shot on hand cam and very much in the similar style to Tom Jones, right?
Oh.
And Hollywood did not catch on to this. So it was still celebrating The Apartment was a great film, but then on to like West Side Story, Lawrence Ribery, very big spectacle films, but they were sort of missing the trend in filmmaking that was happening around that time of this much more personal nature that was happening. And Tom Jones as a film, from what I could get, wasn't really loved that much in Britain. But it was again the French, and the most influential French publication at the time was a publication called Cahiers de Cinema, right, which was written by the French New Wave directors, which was Truffaut, Godard. They had basically this highbrow look at a lot of cinema, and they were the archetypes of what was great cinema and what was not around that time around the world. So when they sort of started to say, you're misunderstanding Tom Jones, it's this piece of brilliance, of which there's some reasons which we'll get to later on, I think that's what changed and created the momentum for it to win the Oscars then, further on down the line. Because it was the film that had this handy cam, kind of very shaky, very on purpose, kind of frenetic style to it that sort of mimicked Breathless from 1960 or otherwise, and was very much in that European times. And I think Hollywood was sort of mimicking that in some stage. So I think that's why it won. But it is awkward because it does sort of celebrate this thing that Albert Finney's the most gorgeous man on earth, which, I mean, maybe because I know what Albert Finney looks like now, maybe I find that kind of a bit ludicrous. But it's also in the fact that he's this good, he's this great guy, but also he's a bit of a philanderer as well. Like, it is cut through the whole thing that he basically jump on anything that looks sideways at him.
Yeah.
And he'll give it a tackle and then go, oops, doesn't matter where it is. He's not a classy kind of fella. He can do it in the middle of a stream, in the middle of a river. It doesn't matter. But I think it has this ridiculous nature to it that I think gives it a lightness and gives it a kind of thing. Plus, I think the story itself's pretty good. I mean, it kind of never delays in anything too long. It twists and turns and kind of has a fun resolution. And even though he's a bit of a jack the lad, he's still probably the most likable character in the entire film for a lot of it. Certainly in the male side. I think a lot of the females are very hard done by in this. But so I think there are positives to it, but I think it's very much the win is very much a reaction to what was going on in kind of more avant-garde cinema and kind of stepping away from the fact that everything had to be a big spectacular as it had been before that and actually soon afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of what have I done now? There's a lot of Molly's pregnant, and and stuff like that. He does have that bumbling quality of tripping through life and kind of enjoying it along the way, looking at trouble and running away from it or avoiding it in some strange manner. And there was some interesting points that I saw like this theme of country versus city folk, that was running throughout, and how he tried in a lot of ways to fit in both cases, sometimes not so successfully, but um, but he kept trying to do that, and it was just like you had these cityfied claptrap or whatever they said, and and country ignorance combined in this one character that was just kind of a, once we find out later, he's kind of a part of both worlds, really. And it's so it was amusing in that sense. It was kind of a amusing masturbatory look at British lifestyle at the time.
Yeah.
and and the whole time I'm just shaking my head. I'm it's like it's a you want to see what's gonna happen, but at the same time, I didn't really. I'm like, I don't really like this that much, but I still want to see what's gonna happen. It's very strange.
And in the first few minutes with the silent introduction, I thought, is this gonna be the whole movie?
Yeah, right.
Like, how long is this gonna go on for?
Yeah. You're right in the fact that it's very much puts Tom Jones sort of in the middle. He was taken on by the upper class, but was thought to be a commoner, essentially, in that he was born out of his mother and father, who were servants, essentially. But because he was brought up by the gentry, he could kind of go in certain circles, but actually to a point, because at the end of the day, his steading or his birthright still determined his future. Very much, regardless of what people thought of him and what he liked. When it came to marrying, it wasn't good enough. The brother or the half brother of his that he wants to talk about, stepbrother, probably is actually, is the biggest ass in the film, but he's the person that's the eligible bachelor. He's the person that's allowed to marry. He's allowed to do whatever, and it doesn't matter what he does. He falls into that role much more easily, whereas Tom doesn't. And it isn't until the end, when he's rescued from his hanging, that he says, "Always like Tom." As soon as it's sort of revealed at the end, that bit's very funny, because it's the father-in-law, so to speak, is his biggest judge and critic. He's the person that basically points out this is not possible, until the point that it is possible, and then all of a sudden he really, really liked him, and he was always in support of all of this, and the whole thing is just a play on the ridiculousness of that. And as you sort of alluded to, the parts of that life that go with it, whether it's the hunting or the fox, the very bloody, brutal nature of that goes along with that. It's thankfully now disappearing much from that different type of life, but only in the past couple of years. Like, that's only been done away with. That has been, it's very, as an awful lot of these things are. It's a sort of period piece set backwards, shot, made in the 60s, but it still was relevant for many, many years thereafter.
The hanging scene was hilarious. I love how he just comes out of nowhere on the horse and just like cuts him down, and he just flops on the horse, and he just rides around with him on the horse. It was great.
He's never gonna get there. Yeah, you're thinking, oh. To be fair, if he had died and hang, it sort of been fitting as well. It's like a suitable end for the film in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And there was one scene where they would just focus so long on him just stuffing food in his mouth on the table, and I'm just like, what is up with this scene? Can this stop? I'm looking away. I'm like, and he's in the room with who we thought may have been his mother, but we did, he didn't know, obviously.
He didn't know.
And she didn't know, and she wasn't, but at the time, it was kind of like, whoa, wait a minute. And, and then was revealed later who his mother really was, but, that was something else. That was a trippy scene.
Yeah.
I just don't know what to make of it.
There are a few of them like that. I think you're right, Jared, insofar as they're very kind of, they present as sort of normal scenes, but there's things that happen within the scene that make you feel very uncomfortable the whole way through. I think there's multiple of those scenes, including the scene where he joins the army and the regiment table, and they start as part of banter, they start going after his beloved, which is hilarious. Like of all the poor women in the thing, the fact that she keeps on coming back to Tom Jones as the eligible bachelor after everything he's done there is sort of hilarious in its own right. But that whole thing where he gets then kind of he gets angry and then kind of ends up getting that guy disqualified, who's the guy that ends up getting needing his hanging. The whole thing's like ludicrous altogether again, probably because of that young man's station, or that person he kind of came back again, was put in front of another regiment, which also happened, actually, if you think about it, in Lawrence of Arabia. Like a lot of those generals, etc. Same with Lawrence of Arabia's character. The reason he was in that position was sort of his father. His birthright got him to a senior place within the army. So there is a link between the two films kind of going forward, but they couldn't be any more different in how they're presented.
Yeah, I mean, they both deal with that that kind of what's that called? Primogeniture benefit, of what have you. That sense that you're born into a certain class, and just because you're born, you get things. I forget what that's called, but anyways, privilege. That privilege. And they both deal with that aspect. Both films do. Yeah.
Even to the point that when he gets his inheritance, or his supposed inheritance that he never gets, money isn't going to break that for him. He has to still go out to war at that stage, or still has to leave, even though he's going to get a wealthy inheritance every month and all the rest of it. Money doesn't bridge the class gap. Nothing bridges the class gap other than birthright. And still true, I would say, in British society, still, that there is, you can't cross. Like, even look at, without getting too controversial, the marriage of Prince Harry to Meghan Markle. A lot of that argument and all that thing is all about class. Even though was a somewhat famous actress, she is not from the right class of people to be with a prince, and therefore would never be accepted by not only that own family, but the society in general. Like, it's just not allowed.
Yeah. Part of the reason we had a revolution over here, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's exactly the point. Actually, in a lot of ways, that's exactly one of the things that caused a revolution. In some ways, is because of that ridiculous construct that they had set up.
Right.
Viva la
the
Republic.
food and the eating was troubling. Yeah,
it was. It really was.
Just like shoveling frogs in their mouth and some sort of meat on a bone, and it was all. It's very very on the nose
and indulgent and things. Over the top. I love the scene where he meets his supposed father. I mean, that's one of my favorites in the entire film. When he gets held up, the guy doesn't have any bullets in his gun or anything, but he's just holding him up, and then he says, "And who are you?" He says, "Dad."
That's right, on the donkey.
On the donkey. Really, really quite humorous and funny. And then his dad becomes his almost servant, because he can pay for him. Again, within the working class, he has money, therefore that's what separates that middle class, if you know what I mean, from the working class, is the amount of money. It's nothing to do with birthright at that stage. So it's become, he works for me, or he's a man of means, therefore, he's better than me, kind of thing. And my near quite son, as I would say, is a man worth looking up for. And everybody loves Tom Jones, isn't that what it says in the front of the of the poster, isn't it?
Yeah, and there was definitely a certain level of misogyny in this film. The women were really either the butt of jokes, or used to get a joke on somebody else, and they what was it? Some of the lines were, "No man dies for love except on the stage." Which, okay, that's. And then there was another one, was what civilization puts women above the law? Those were direct lines from the movie. I'm just like, wow.
Very cutting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying. about 20 minutes in, and I thought this movie has to be over soon, right? Like,
It is a long movie. Like that's
it's
what I'm saying.
long. Yeah.
It has some kind of links to being an Oscar movie in that it's overlong. You know, obviously not quite Lawrence of Arabia kind of epic style, but it's over 2 hours, and it does span a lot of open air shots. Very little of it shot on stage. You know
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. It has that grandness that Oscar type films suppose do, and epics had at that time, and it also has a brilliant scene. The scene of that was shot from the helicopter of the hunt, and then interspersing that with the hand cut stuff on the ground of the jumping through the hedges and stuff is absolutely phenomenally shot. It's incredible. In fact,
Mhm.
especially when you consider even comparing it against Lawrence of Arabia, which had like very expansive scenes and all the rest of it, nothing I think captured energy and excitement and all of that kind of stuff quite like that scene does, and it kind of enhanced the processness of the hunt itself and the
Mhm.
energy of the hunt and all of that captured it really well. And it's interesting because I watched an interview with the guy who did the cinematography, and he had to be convinced that he was good enough to do that before he started the film. He was
Oh,
like
really?
he had to have other people come up and say, look, I think other people should be doing this. This is of a grander scale than I've ever done beforehand. But that scene and that thing is very famous, and that to me, that's the one that the Cahiers de Cinema or Truffaut, etc., would have tacked on and went, "This is high class filmmaking," because people weren't really doing that of that level at that stage, especially using the hand. Kind of, it's a very uncouth nature way of filming because they would kind of capture the faces and they'd fall out of shot for a second and then they come back in, but that was also used not to be perfect, but to capture an energy and kind of a freneticness of the thing. And it was very different to what else was happening around, especially Hollywood at that stage. So it does have its moments of being great film, um, but to me, that's the one scene.
Mhm.
Yeah, you mentioned capturing the energy and the freneticness of it, but I think it also captured the barbarity of it.
Yeah, yeah, that was absolutely.
Because and I think that's in there because it's a barbaric practice, and the you have the focusing on that for that long of a time with that shot, but it's all the people who can afford to do that
Mhm.
kind of thing,
Yeah.
acting in the worst ways as a contrast to the
Hmm.
people who can't afford to do it, who are the ones who are usually called barbaric or
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
lower, and so that it serves a purpose, to have
Yeah.
that shot the way it was, rather than just having a quick mention of it or something like that.
I think that's the scene that kind of that puts it over the edge. I think that without that scene, I don't think it would even be considered for
Yeah.
an award like this. That's kind of what made it stand out.
Yeah.
Because other than that, it gives it more of an epic feel. That whole
Yeah,
sequence.
it does. That's the bit that makes it stand out. I love actually how they shot up because what they did, they got a wee tiny car that was really low to the ground, and they
Hmm.
attached a thing in the back that would basically somebody would sit astride like it was one of the horses. So Sophie, there was a seat where Sophie kind of is looking over at Tom Jones and he's looking back. He's shot from a camera command at the front, and it's very bouncy and jumpy, and she's in the back of the thing that's always looking up at them. So this is so low to the ground, so it was getting shot at ground level to get as much of the energy and the movement of the horses, etc., along the bottom. And I think it's really effective in mainly that scene, but most of the horse riding sequences are all shot like that, where they're kind of looking back, and the person that you're seeing closest is actually not on a horse. He's on like a wooden frame, but you sit astride it like a horse.
Hmm.
And everybody else is shot handicap, so the kind of the bouncing of everybody else kind of gives the illusion of movement rather than the person that you're looking at. And it's only when you look back at it that you kind of go, "Oh, okay, that's quite clever." But like you say, Steve, those are the filmic parts of it that people were able to latch on and go, "See, this film has merit. This film
Hmm.
has something about it to enable it to be nominated or rise through the ranks." Because an awful lot of Oscar wins, as we'll see, come from films gaining momentum. A bit like, MVP votes in sports, especially American sports, that kind of stuff. The popular things that happen, that there's like a narrative gets built that year about a certain player or a
Yeah.
certain set of events that happen that culminate in a win. And then sometimes you look back at it after and go, what were we all thinking? How did this person not win that
Yeah.
year or something like that? It happens very, very often. But these things are very similar to that in a lot of ways. And this one, I think, had the same. Now, the only thing to say is it was well watched in America. It was like the fourth
Oh,
highest
really?
grossing movie that year in America.
Wow.
So, it was something that people were going ahead and watching. But I think, and you can maybe attest to this better than I can, there is a fascination or a warmth that American audiences have for anglicized fare in a lot of ways. So, like when you can almost think of Albert Finney a bit like Hugh Grant for many, many years. You could put Hugh Grant in absolutely anything
Okay. Yeah.
for many years, and that anglicised nature, that kind of English gentleman, kind of carried on through and carried a lot of plots and a lot of films, and he was, he earned a lot of money for many, many years because he could basically fit into any kind of archetype of that nature, an Anglophile being a big kind of moneymaker within America.
Oh, yeah. One of the jokes going around is, if you want your documentary to do well, get somebody with a British accent to narrate it.
Yeah, for sure. Ralph Fiennes, etc., has made a fortune out of all that.
But
that
it's
stuff.
kind of funny. Your description of the movie Tom Jones, kind of bumbling its way to the Oscar, fits the character of Tom Jones, kind of bumbling his way into a life of the nobility at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Fun movie.
Yeah. Interesting stuff.
Don't know if it's a good movie, but it's a fun movie. I wish it was about 40 minutes shorter.
Yeah. The forces of sobriety. That was another quip from the film that somebody was complaining about. Forces of sobriety were keeping him down or something like that.
Yeah. Very good times. You're muted, Steve, by the way.
I was just laughing about the forces of sobriety.
Yeah.
Good line.
Yeah.
That's why I'm drinking a beer right now.
That's the only reason. Yes, you're commemorating the film. Yeah, the forces of sobriety.
Paying homage.
Yeah. Interestingly, one of the other things that's interesting about this in terms of the Oscars is, like, obviously, not everybody loved Tom Jones because he didn't win the Oscar for Best Actor. This was the year that Sidney Poitier won for Lilies of the Field, being the first black actor to win. But in the Best Supporting Actress, there were 3 females from this film that were all nominated.
Oh, really?
And not Susanna York wasn't even one of them, because I suppose she would have been actress. It was Tim Evans, Joyce Redmond, and the one who probably most kind of thought of is Diane Salento, who was in a lot of Hammer films, who's Molly. And her part was nearly cut out of the film altogether.
Really?
Because when they were looking back at the film, they were kind of thinking, like, Molly's character paints Tom in a bit of a negative light constantly throughout it. Her having a more prominent role does too much, but it's I don't know. It gives him a devilishness, I think, rather than and the fact that he was friendly with her. You know what I mean? She was sort of taken with him, sort of speaking. He was a young idiot, young man kind of thing. I think it sort of worked, and she was so good in it.
She also tried to get him to take responsibility for her kid.
Right. That's right.
Even though that scene where she reveals a guy standing behind her bed, I'm just like,
yeah.
That was pretty funny.
This guy behind the curtain.
And then after that, there's like a riot at the church, which was a pretty funny thing as well.
Yeah. She's shunned quite a bit for that.
Yeah.
But I think she's great in the film. I think she carries an awful lot of the first part of that movie. Every time she's on stage, because before that's a bit kind of fumbling, a bit like we're talking about beforehand. It kind of goes from, oh God, I don't like any of these characters, but she sort of coalesces it kind of in showing the difference between even her station, Tom's situation and then the upper class. You know what I mean? It kind of shows those
Yeah.
multiple lines that are there, and actually the different things that affect those classes, like who the father is hiding behind a curtain, all of that kind of stuff from the working class at that stage. You know, being humorous, but also being sort of on the nose a little bit.
Yeah, and also it's one of those situations where just Tom's off the hook all of a sudden. Like he continually gets in trouble, and he
Yeah,
continually just gets off the hook. And it's
Hmm.
not even his own doing that does it. It's just circumstances, just something that's there that, oh, okay, I'm off the hook now, and he's off to the next, bumbling adventure where he gets in trouble again. and
yeah.
I'm trying to think of what is the lesson here, because there's a lack of lesson here, because it's like, what does Tom Jones actually do to, other than just sometimes being a nice guy and nice to talk to or whatever? What does he actually do to come out on top at the end? You know,
That that's
Nothing.
exactly the message, though. He
not
literally
much.
does nothing except his mother's changed, and
Yeah,
that's exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's the point of the entire movie, is the fact that Tom didn't change. In fact, unless he was his mother, who it was, he would have been hung and he would have
Yeah.
been killed. You know, and instead he's he's thrown over a horse and can't saved, and then is elevated in society, and like it's almost like but it's very cutting take on British society then because of
yeah,
that.
Yeah.
it is. It's quite cutting on British society. Like I said, you know, British lifestyle masturbation, and
Yeah,
and it, yeah, you're right. It's kind of damning almost if you
Yeah.
really think about it.
Kind of took it as it's this moron, this goofball can find a way to be successful and kind of fall forward every time he
yeah.
falls, just because of who he is. Um,
Very much a staple of British society. I would
yeah.
say since this fact that the upper class people fail forward throughout society. We
Yeah.
even just had a prime minister who was very much the definition of that person, somebody that showed no talent or skill the whole way through it, but sort of likable, and end up being prime minister, and sort of a very popular prime minister in a lot of ways, because he sort of was Tom Jones in a lot of ways. Except, you know, very very similar. Those things keep on perpetuating and repeating themselves.
Yeah. Well,
Hmm.
Chris, when you fall into your fortune, don't forget us.
Well, unless I change who my parents are, it'll not matter.
Watching this film, I wondered, would this film, the way it exists, work today? I I don't know that it would work as a comedy. I think it might work as a drama, but I think as a comedy, I don't know that it would be received very well.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to picture it with, like what Chris said, with Hugh Grant
Yeah.
Hmm.
in the role in a more modern thing, and I
Maybe.
think, I think he could pull it off. I think he could pull off that bumbling idiot who falls into a fortune.
He
It
yeah.
wouldn't surprise me if in one of his films he already did that.
Well, he did that in real life
He
back in
didn't
the
realize.
Yeah, that's true.
I
Um,
mean,
it is the more modern would be more heavily satirized. I don't think it would be played quite as straight as a comedy, if you know what I mean,
yeah.
or as a fumbling comedy. I think that sex comedy was very much of the '60s. I think if you move forward in the '90s and further forward, we get darker comic. So we get to not kind of bring up. Someone talked about not too long ago. American Psycho would have been a very
Hmm.
darkly comic satire. It was very much attacking certain parts of society and doing that kind of stuff. There's plenty more of them, like Don't Look Up would have been one that was on Netflix many years ago. I think that type of movie would change the messaging of it, in terms of how you present it, but it'd be very dark. Those films tend to be very dark when they're made nowadays. Although I do think you get away with it with
Hmm.
with a Hugh Grant, especially in it. Although I think Hugh Grant would probably be Mr. Allworthy at this stage, and they'd have to find another young
Yeah,
uh,
now, yeah, right, yeah,
Englishman. Don't know exactly who that'd
yeah.
be. I'm sure they're
Henry
queuing
Cavill.
up. Henry Cavill. Can you imagine? Henry Cavill's too good. He's actually too good looking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. He is. Uh, the only problem I think nowadays, though, I think the ending would be a lot more sappy and romanticized, rather than, all right, you're good, you got it, off you go.
I think it was made now. He actually would die. They wouldn't have got him in time. I think he would have died by hanging, and I think that's the point that made. Rather than it being a happy ending, it would have been a serious. That's what I'm saying about that. Like nowadays, they would have a much more cutting point. I think you have to spell it out for audiences a bit more to say, you don't get your happy ending because
Wait
this
a
is
minute
what
now,
happens.
Chris. That means it's not a romantic sex comedy anymore.
That is true.
It depends on what you want here. Do you want the dark comedy or do you want the rom-com?
Interesting.
I'm trying to think of the last kind of mainstream sex comedy that we've had. I might have to go back a long way for that to happen. 80s-ish maybe, something around that. That would have been a bit horror or something. I don't know, Frankenhooker or something. I don't know. It's not even quite of that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, the sex comedy bit was very much a early to mid '60s kind of point in time thing, especially in Britain. And I think the other thing that's worth saying about Tom Jones is it's because 1963, probably made in '62, it was very much at the anarch part of British society that became the swinging '60s then and became the vehicle for that later on, where it sort of moved forward and became kind of this license to do whatever you want, be whatever you want. The youth will take over. Will take over the place and kind of do it. So it sort of is representative of that in British society. And even Tony Richardson, the filmmaker, had his period of time in Britain where he made a lot of these films, not quite like Tom Jones, but Man in the White Suit, Taste of Honey, all of those kind of things. They were all made by the same company, and they have the same sort of very youthful kind of look about them.
So what you're saying is it probably wouldn't be made today in the same manner. I think they would have to turn it into a rom-com, or they'd have to go down a very dark route.
I think it is very much a place and time, and there was lots of actual more overt sex comedies happening around that stage and into the '70s. They were kind of very much in British cinema at that time, especially funded by the Crays and the like, because as a way to launder their money. But that's another conversation.
I think it'd have to have some. I think if it was like a dark, like this kind of comedy, you'd have to have a message of some kind.
Yeah.
Some kind of. There would need to be a clear theme or kind of because I think it's a little bit. It would need to be more on the nose to have some kind of message.
Yeah, I would be surprised if most of the cinema going people that went to see this, whether anywhere in the world, kind of got any message out of this at the time. It was very much a relic, a kind of adventure-ish kind of film. It's almost like Barry Lyndon without a less serious Barry Lyndon, if that was possible in some ways. So it has a lot of the hallmarks of Lyndon, which was 74, 75. But just kind of had this kind of meandering adventure, kind of followed the good guy without people getting the message at all. Like I would imagine most people came out of it and went, "Oh, it was a bit of fun." That was a bit the height of it. I enjoyed that.
What a romp!
What a romp! That's the word I was looking for. Thank you very much.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
So as far as the films we've seen so far, I think The Apartment is the best one of the bunch.
West Side Story is still my favorite out of them all, but I can definitely accept The Apartment as being most people's choice out of these.
That's my favorite so far.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Surprisingly, I'm still surprised it is.
Yeah.
Oh,
I wasn't expecting to like it that much, and I did.
Yeah, I love that movie. So is this the bottom of the list for you both?
Push the button, man.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love Lawrence of Arabia, but I think it's a better film than this. Certainly in standard of time. In fact, it'll be a while before Tom Jones gets removed, if at all. Yeah. Next one will be interesting though, considering Jared wasn't a fan of West Side Story.
Oh, I was.
Oh,
I was.
Yeah, it was.
It's just not my favorite.
Not if all right. Okay.
I still like it. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Next one's my wife's favorite film of all time.
Oh, really? My Fair Lady?
Yeah. My Fair Lady, one of my children is named after it, in fact.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Nice.
I'll be sure to bite my tongue.
You can say what you like. If anything, you're not allowed to criticize the original screenplay, which is by a prominent Irishman as well, George Bernard Shaw. So,
Oh yeah. Okay.
Pygmalion,
Hmm.
That's right.
which I've also seen. But no, I think My Fair Lady's kind of fair game because I think actually it's to be worth discussing and kind of plant the seed in both of your heads. West Side Story is quite a serious musical, right? In a lot of ways,
Sure.
there's not too much kind of
Yeah.
levity with it. You're coming the year after Tom Jones, and musicals are still quite popular around this mid '60s as a main fort, and it sort of bridges the line. I think there's a bit of hilarity and a bit of poking fun at itself in My Fair Lady as opposed to, West Side Story. So I think it's very these Oscar winners often talk about kind of themes of what's happening within the world at that time, or kind of one leads on to the other one in a little bit. It's kind of like each little year's a little course correction of something that happened the year beforehand in some ways. So it's kind of interesting that way to look at it. One of the things that makes this doing this year on year kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Anything else you guys can think of? Tom Jones.
It'll be interesting to see it just thinking about 10 films time. By the time we get in the heart of the 70s, which, I mean, knockout film after knockout film in the 70s, whether you look back and go 60s and go, 63, Tom Jones. How do you feel about it now in the context of everything that you've seen since?
Yeah.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah. It'll be a standout for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite famed for that in some
Yeah.
ways. Like.
I did find some people that really adore this film that think it's one of the best. I mean, but I just don't see it. But but kudos
Like I say, I enjoy it, but I can't say that it's a great movie. It definitely falls into that kind of, I'd watch it, have a good time with it, but I wouldn't be nominating it for any kind of main acting awards or main, thing. Maybe the cinematography, maybe that'd be a bit for that one scene, but that's pretty much it.
10-minute big baby face would have taken it out
the end
for
of
that.
I will give them this, that they really do. They know what they're doing, and they really go for it. And they aren't they don't tiptoe. So I respect that they just kind of they know exactly what kind of film they're making, and they lean into it and have fun with it. So
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Mad respect. I know how hard it is to make a film. So
yeah. Big an Oscar-winning Best Picture film.
Indeed.
Yeah. Just imagine having a film that you made that was kind of had a serious tone, and being beat by Tom Jones with the Best Picture.
Well, interesting.
Cleopatra
was released this year. Like it was Cleopatra was one of the big ones, and How the West Has Won, the Western. Those were two epic kind of things. But again, when you compare it to the one the year before, which was Lawrence of Arabia, which is still to this day probably the most epic film that has ever been made, you need to out epic the epic to win the Oscar the next year. That's what I'm saying. This slight course correction. Cleopatra couldn't win it. How the West Has Won couldn't win it because the year afterwards it followed. I think it had to go a different direction in that way. So those films had no chance in their own way.
People were epicked out.
Yeah, epicked out indeed. But it would have been a poor relation in comparison to Lawrence of Arabia in terms of what it looked like, etc. So those ones, while they went for the epic thing, didn't work out.
Yeah. Down Lawrence of Arabia, see what you did. Well, cool. Well, so next up, 1964, My Fair Lady. Looking forward to that one. And in the meantime, Chris, where can people find you?
They can find me on patreon.com primarily, and through the podcasts that are on there, like Speculations. You can find my film thoughts. I'm going to make a video soon on my name, Chris Mohan, or you can find me at Book Thoughts on Chronicle of Chris. YouTube channel, both separate.
Nice. And Jared?
You can find me at the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and you can find me on pagechewing.com. including places like Speculations, Film Joing, and other read-alongs and stuff.
Just a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple. Well, cool. So, yeah, so until next time, hope everyone has a fantastic day, and we will talk to everyone very soon.